Welcome to the Hail Varsity post-game reaction show following Nebraska's surprising 41-23 loss to Illinois. That might be putting it a little bit lightly. I'm Hail Varsity Managing Editor Brandon Vogel. I'm joined this week by recruiting analyst Greg Smith. Greg, how are you?
Hello. I'm okay. It's getting ugly out there, but we're hanging in there, trying to make sense of what all we saw today.
Yeah, it got ugly about, let's say, 6 minutes after 11 a.m. Central Time. I would have to go back and time that, but seems like that was about the time of that first play that put Nebraska in an early hole. I think the big takeaway from today is that Nebraska fixed its second half issues. 13 points, only 6 coming in. So there you go. I think that's it. I think we're a wrap for today. We'll talk to you next week ahead of Iowa. Now, there's a lot to get into. Let's just break this into 2 parts to start, and we'll get into some big picture issues after that. Offensively, Greg, what's going on with Nebraska?
Nothing good. But actually, I shouldn't say nothing good. I should say it's a really frustrating watch to kind of just sit and look at Nebraska's offense, because on one hand, you can say nothing good. On the other hand, you can say that you could literally see guys open. You could see certain run plays even where creases were there. And I thought they did a better job, in particularly, specifically that first drive, the first full drive that they had when they were mixing Marvin Scott in there. I thought he had a terrific drive on that very first drive. And I thought that was kind of the template. But it's still a lot of the same issues that have plagued them all season, plagued them again today. Even with Luke McCaffrey in there again, it was, guys are open, but they're not being seen, or guys are coming open and balls are being thrown late. But then it's not just on Luke, because then there's guys that are open, but he doesn't have time to throw. It's just and then sometimes mixed in that there's drops, right? And so it's just a myriad of issues at really every level of the offense, which makes it even more frustrating, because you see just enough to give yourself a little hope that things maybe are about to turn, and it doesn't happen.
Yeah, the lack of a downfield passing game is really killing them. And, it's strange to think back to that game against Ohio State, where they didn't have that there, and they didn't really even push it much. And Frost was like, it's one game against a really good opponent, which kind of implied, like, we'll get there. That part's coming. 4 games in, like, still very much not here. I think the most surprising thing to me was, like, how many times there were just no, like, in rhythm passes. I mean, I'm sure there were some, but it feels like in the immediate aftermath of the game that there were no in rhythm passes. It's no, like, drop back, get the ball out. Like, I know where I'm going. Like, Luke, a lot of the time sat back there and felt like, still processing, which was kind of the reason going into last week's game that I thought, maybe you make a change from Adrian. Like, he's just not seeing it. Like, if Luke can be out there and just kind of react and trust the plays that they're running, this offense this year at least, remains a mystery to me. The success rate in this game, like the down to down, who's winning each down, offense, defense, was good. It's been good all season, which tells me, it doesn't tell me, but it makes me think, like, conceptually, like, this is still strong. Execution-wise, they're having some issues. Personnel-wise, they're having some issues. And, you can't turn the ball over 5 times, 5-0 in turnover margin. You're not going to win hardly any games when you do that. Although, 2 of those McCaffrey interceptions were on 4th down. Not that it excuses them, but, like, they weren't back-breaking interceptions.
Right. Yeah, and I think that part of what you're saying too about the lack of being able to find consistency has been something that we've talked about specifically with wide receiver. And I've written about that a couple of times here over the last couple of weeks, of trying to essentially build up those young wide receivers to be able to get them out there on a consistent basis, because it did kind of dawn on me the last couple of weeks that at some point you do need to have guys out there enough consistently to A, build rapport with a quarterback, but B, just so you feel comfortable with what you're doing out there from everyone's point of view, right? It's not just the receivers that need that comfort level. It is the quarterbacks as well. And I think you saw the effects of that again today, was kind of how disjointed the passing game looked, as we even, kind of shuffled another guy in, Oliver Martin. It was great that he got eligible, and he looked serviceable out there. Made a couple of catches, played on special teams as well. But on the flip side of that is it's another guy for you to have to get used to being in the mix.
Yeah. That was a welcome sight. I think he can help them in terms of that wide receiver group going forward the rest of the year. It just, man, it feels like such hard work when Nebraska has the ball right now.
Right.
And you see them going back to the same guys again and again, which is good. But you need to be able to hurt teams other ways too. Like Nebraska's, we're in a bad spot. Crap, we need to play is most often a quarterback run. We saw more from Wandale, who by the end of things had a pretty solid day statistically. So that's good, but it's either that or nothing. It feels like a lot of the time. There's not a lot of plays right now that they just line up and you're like, okay, they execute this and they just run this play well.
Right,
So.
and I think part of that comes back to a lot of fans' quote unquote favorite play, that swing pass, those bubbles that they can't seem to execute, because those would be the plays that, okay, whatever down distance it is, we know we can go and get that if we run this play and execute it, and they can't do that right now. The same kind of, we talked about this before with inside zone and the running game. Those pet plays are just kind of non-existent right now, even the ones that are in theory more simple to execute.
Yeah, so they can't stretch the field down the field through the passing game, and like you mentioned, they're even struggling to stretch it horizontally with the inability to make those bubbles and tunnels. They don't run a ton of tunnels, more bubbles, but those part of the offense, like watching Purdue should have beat Minnesota on Friday night. Rondale Moore's triumphant return. They still make a killing out on the edge with him. I looked it up. I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet. So Rondale Moore obviously missed last year, but in terms of like career offensive touches, so receptions or carries, like they're almost exactly the same at this point. Nebraska's making an effort, and it didn't happen early this season, to get Robinson the ball, and today was probably as good as he looked. In terms of stepping up in difficult situations when not a whole lot was going right, it kind of made you feel more like that gamer gene that I think we all knew he had is still there and strong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's transition to the defense. Newly minted black shirt alternates today. Probably the first time in history Nebraska's worn all black, almost certainly, I'm going to assume. What'd you see on that side, Greg?
I saw it's more about what I didn't see, especially from the outset of that game. I did not see the same enthusiasm that I had seen from those first few games. Even the Ohio State game, when Ohio State was obviously able to make plays on them, you still felt like they had a different level of passion in that game, rallying to the football. I thought that the defensive line was more disruptive than every other game almost, maybe save for last week. They had some flashes in this game. That was kind of the big thing for me, is it just did not feel like the defense that I was, at least in my mind, starting to settle in to think that we were seeing on a week-to-week basis. We just didn't see it, and I think that obviously the scoreboard reflected that, but it just did not look the same as it had looked in previous weeks.
No, Illinois came in and hit a bunch of big plays, particularly in the first half, which was the part of this that you could have expected, I think, from Illinois. Like they've got some individual talents, and they can do that to you. In fact, that was like what they were doing best coming in. Nebraska actually ended up with a little bit better explosive plays percentage, but when you're up 21 early in the second half, like Illinois was. I mean, I think that was the big difference too, not to go back to offense too much, but like just the difference between McCaffrey and like what you have to ask him to do when you're leading by 21 versus trailing is a massive, massive difference. one pass defended by the defensive backs today. Well, by anyone, but that's primarily a defensive backs statistic. That's shocking to me based on the experience level they have there. And that group it's been okay at times, but it's just been a struggle. And, in Illinois, you got to give credit to them. They've got some talented receivers, but they were able to hit big passes. And the thing you can't give up is those big runs against an offense like this. And they hit those too. And none of it had to do with Isaiah Williams, who ran wild last week. It was just shocking to me that on a down-to-down basis how good Illinois was in this game, because they hadn't been all year. So you got to kind of put that one on the defensives tab, I think. But man, it's tough. You think back to that Penn State game a little bit, and the defense, well, it basically put 10 points on the board itself, which with the struggles on the other side, Nebraska needs right now. And just came up with two key stops here. Illinois moved the ball at a similar kind of clip, I think, to Penn State, which is a surprise. But you had a 21-point lead through some turnovers, so it was a huge difference in the game.
Yeah, it definitely was. And I think that one of the, Illinois being able to run and throw the ball seemingly at will was a huge surprise. Knowing how much their offense struggled kind of coming into the season, right? You kind of have to, one of those has to be taken away in a game. And coming into the game, maybe I would have said Nebraska would have been able to take that run away and made them one-dimensional with the pass, and you kind of take your chances with the secondary matching up against their receivers. But it didn't quite work out that way, and it just kind of seemed like from the beginning that Nebraska was caught flat on defense, and that Illinois was as fired up to play that game as you're going to see. And I don't know what is attributed to that and how we got there, but that was just kind of the feeling and the vibe coming up. Because I wouldn't even necessarily say, well, Nebraska missed a lot of tackles, or they had a lot of bust in coverage or anything like that. It was really just that they got soundly beat there with Illinois' offense versus Nebraska's defense. So it's even kind of puzzling without watching it back what the deficiencies were even out there.
Yeah, Frost, called it, paraphrasing here, not a direct quote, basically a failure in all three phases. And, special teams is usually, it's an important part of the game, but in terms of the number of plays, it's usually relatively small. Here, you can basically boil it down to one. Like Nebraska's chance in this game was that 3-and-out it forced on the first drive. And you're like, okay, maybe there's hope here. And then one of the stranger fake punch you'll see, which was clearly, something that Illinois, to its credit, had seen on film and was like, okay, this could very well be here. And the punter tried not to take the first down Nebraska was giving it once or twice, but it was just so open. He got there anyway. And that was kind of it from there. Illinois, it was just such a complete game from them offensively. Like, they scored on long drives. They scored on short drives. I think it was an 89-yard drive in about 4 plays to make it 28-7. That was it was at that point where you're like, yeah, this is going to have a hard time getting back on the rails. So
yeah, you just couldn't see a way where Nebraska was going to be able to get enough consecutive stops in the game. And which is honestly, of all the surprising things that happened, it's probably the most surprising thing to me maybe is that we're saying that after this game.
Yeah, looking back at the chart here, 1 3-and-out and 1 6-play drive that ended in a punt for Illinois, and then one at the end when it was basically academic at that point. Like you knew by midway through the second quarter, if Nebraska didn't force at least probably 2 turnovers, it was going to have a tough time because they just weren't able to slow the Illini down, which was a pretty big surprise, I guess, of the two sides. I would have said the defense has been the better of those two, but not today. There's a bunch of big picture questions. If we start going into all of them, we could probably be here for an hour, but we'll try not to do that. I guess, what's your concern level right now, Greg, with the future of this program?
Oh, it's higher than I would say it's been at any point during this the Scott Frost tenure. And the reason, and there's a few reasons for that. I think that one, you finally were in a position where you felt like, hey, if you're a program, you're thinking, we've got some momentum potentially, right? We get over the hump, we get this first win after fighting to play football, we get this first win after having kind of a tough draw in the beginning of the season, knowing that you were playing some really tough opponents. You, in particular with Northwestern, you should have probably beaten them. And then you get that win against Penn State, and you're like, okay, here we go. We'll get the ball rolling because we've got an Illinois team coming in who really isn't that good. They have not played well. They're one of the bottom, probably 3 teams coming into this game in the conference. The team's a double-digit favorite. You just need to go out there, take care of business, and then it sets up another big opportunity against a rival in Iowa in a short week. So in my mind, as I wrote this week, there's no way that they'll come out and have a letdown because they'll understand what's at stake here, in particular at this crossroads with Scott Frost's tenure. And then they come out and play and coach like this. I don't want to. It cannot be just the play on the field because it's pretty clear too that they were outcoached in this game as well. So to have the total program failure that you had in this game, knowing the stakes at hand. I can't be anything but somewhat pessimistic about the future just because I don't know how you get that fixed internally because one of my bigger concerns now going forward is that we have this group of guys on the team who have, there are seniors on the team that have not gone to a bowl game.
Yeah.
And so you got them, and maybe they start to waver a little bit, though you hope not, of course, but maybe they start to waver. But what happens to the guys like Wandale, the guys in that class, guys that have been around just a couple of years? Are they starting to think, oh, here we go again, we're going down the rabbit hole of losing another season? That's where I would get really concerned. And if that happens, then it's really hard to pull yourself out of that a couple of times as a coaching staff.
Yeah, for a game where Nebraska was a 2-touchdown favorite and, you're kind of like, okay, get one here. And, okay, then you've got 2 in a row. You're going to Iowa. Like, this team you got to beat to kind of show some progress. Like, eventually you're going to have to get past Iowa, as we all know Nebraska hasn't done in a while. To go to today where, like, I'm having thoughts in the first half. I'm like, man. So that's where this thing still is. Like, it can beat a Penn State, even a winless Penn State. Like, that's still a talented team, but also lose to Illinois a week later. And it's like, with the eligibility, with this strange year, like, who's ready to, like, just run this back? Like, and there's still games remaining, and that's important to remember. It's always good. It's always important not to, like, put too much on one game, but it's just there's not a ton to point to right now, and you're going to be entering year 4 after whatever this year ends up being. And you look at those last 4 games or last 3 games, and maybe that Minnesota game is, like, viewed as a coin flip by the time we get there, but Nebraska will be a pretty healthy underdog to Iowa. It's just the record could end up being a lot worse than I thought it would be coming in, for sure, based on a lot of the offseason talk about Frost liking the team that had formed. And I think that, it's all, you have to be careful with social media too. But saw some things on that are a little bit alarming from both current players, young players on the roster who did not play today, and future Huskers. Should we just ignore that, Greg? Should we just pack it in and call it a year? Like, how bad is it right now?
You cannot ignore that. You can't ignore it because, especially when it comes to recruits, because we're talking about kids with options, right? Like, you're not talking about guys that are not going to have, double-digit colleges calling them should they want to waver on their commitment, right? And so you do have to, because you get into this vicious cycle, right? Of if you're always doing enough to get those recruits interested and committed, but then you're barely hanging on to them, or they end up decommitting because you've had a bad year, then you just turn back around and the next year you talk about you don't have enough talent. So you just kind of end up in this really vicious cycle. So you definitely, obviously don't want to be in this situation, but it is definitely something that you're going to have to monitor. And it's something that the staff is going to have to monitor. And I'm sure some of their first calls to 21 guys will be to some of those commits to just kind of, massage the feelings and let them know as best they can. But the real interesting thing about that, though, is that it feels to me that the kids in the class have been watching Nebraska football very closely this year. And I don't know how to quantify that. It just feels like a lot of them are tuned into games. And I don't know if that's because there's just maybe because of other cancellations, there's more ability for them to kind of sit down and watch Nebraska. But it does feel like they're in tune with what's happening here. And when things are going poorly, obviously they're seeing that and they want to know that the direction of the program is trending in the way that it was sold to them.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing that has people potentially wavering, or, you never know with a tweet. Like, they could be reacting to something totally different, although there were a couple there that were pretty clear. And I think you're right. Like, the staff's got to jump on it because, in a normal year, in the third week of November, maybe you could say, well, like, yeah, this guy's been committed for a while. He didn't take any other visits. But in a year like this, nobody's taking any visits.
Right.
It's like everything is sight unseen. For the most part. So flipping might even be a little bit easier, but we'll worry about that later. There's still plenty to get into from this game, which we will be doing on hailvarsity.com throughout the week ahead. A lot to break down with this one in particular. So we'll do that, try and make sense of it. Short week for Nebraska as they play Iowa on Black Friday next week. So it's going to be a tension-filled run-up, I guess, to Thanksgiving. But hopefully everybody will be able to relax for at least a day and enjoy some good food.
Hopefully. Hope so.
Yeah. So thanks for watching, guys. Like I said, check out hailvarsity.com for all our coverage from the game, and we'll be back next week to do it again. Thanks.
Thank you.